UN Security Council meeting on M23, Paul Kagame, Democratic Republic of Congo, Goma situation.
Give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements. And I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr.
je
President, I
remercie
wish to
la
thank
représentante spéciale
the
adjointe du
Deputy
secrétaire
Special
général
Representative of the
pour sa
Secretary General
présentation et je
for her
salue
briefing.
la présence
I welcome
parmi
here
nous
among
de la
us
ministre des Affaires étrangères de
the
la
Minister
République
of Foreign
démocratique du
Affairs
Congo.
for the Democratic Republic
Le
of the
Conseil de
Congo.
sécurité
The
se
Security
réunit
Council is
une
meeting
nouvelle fois
once again
en raison de la
due
détérioration
to the
continue
sustained
de la
deterioration
situation
of the
dans le Nord
situation
Kivu.
in North Kivu.
Alors nous parlons,
As we
le
speak,
M23 prend le contrôle de
M23
Goma
is taking control of Goma
avec le soutien
with the
actif du
active
Rwanda.
support of Rwanda.
Cela doit constituer un
That
signal
must
d'alerte
set
pour ce
alarm bells
Conseil,
ringing for this
comme
council,
cela avait été
as it
le
did
cas il y a 12 ans.
12 years ago.
Le risque de
The
contagion
risk of
régionale
regional
est
spillover
réel.
is real.
La prise de Goma
The
comporte des
seizure
risques
of Goma
majeurs pour la
brings with
sécurité des
it major
populations et elle
risks
conduit au
for the
déplacement
security
de
of
centaines
civilians
de milliers de
and
personnes.
prompts the
Il est
displacement of hundreds
impératif
of
d'y
thousands of
mettre un
people.
terme. La
It is
France
vital
condamne
to put an
fermement
end
cette
to that
offensive.
situation.
Le
France
M23 doit
firmly
cesser immédiatement
condemns
son
this
offensive
offensive.
et se
M23
retirer
must
des territoires
immediately
dont
cease
il
the
a pris le
offensive
contrôle.
and withdraw from
Le soutien aux
territories
groupes
over which
armés
it has seized
par toutes les
control.
parties
Support
doit
for armed
cesser.
groups by
La
all
priorité va
parties
donc au
must
retour
stop.
au
Our
cessez-le-feu et à
priority
la
must
reprise du
be
dialogue. Il n'y a pas
renewed
d'issue
support for a
militaire
ceasefire and the
au
resumption
conflit.
of dialogue. There
La
is no
France
military
réaffirme
solution
sa
to this conflict.
solidarité
France reaffirms
envers
its
la République
solidarity
démocratique du
with the
Congo et son
Democratic Republic and
attachement
its
à son
unwavering
intégrité
commitment to
territoriale et à sa
upholding the
souveraineté.
DRC's
Ici comme
territorial
ailleurs,
integrity
le
and
respect
sovereignty.
de
Here
la Charte
and
des Nations
elsewhere,
Unies
compliance with the
s'impose.
UN Charter
La France
is
poursuit
the
ses
order
contacts
of the
au plus haut
day.
niveau
France
afin
continues
de
its engagement
relancer
at
un
the highest
processus
level in order
politique.
to
Nous saluons la
resume a political
mobilisation
process. We
régionale.
hail
Nous
regional
espérons que la réunion du
mobilization in
Conseil
this
de
regard,
paix et
and we
sécurité
hope
de l'Union
that the
africaine ce
African
jour
Union
et le
PSC
sommet de la
meeting
communauté
today
d'Afrique de
and the
l'Est demain
EAC summit
permettront
tomorrow will
d'avancer dans la
foster
direction d'une paix
progress
durable.
towards a
Le dialogue
sustainable,
engagé dans le cadre
lasting
des
peace.
processus de
Dialogue which
Luanda
has
et
been
Nairobi doit reprendre sans
initiated
délai.
within
La
the
France
Luanda
apporte
and
son
Nairobi
plein
process must
soutien
resume
à ces
as a matter of
processus et elle appelle
urgency.
les parties à
France supports
respecter leurs
these
engagements
regional
conclus
processes
dans le
and call
cadre
upon
du
parties to
processus
uphold
de
their
Luanda.
commitments entered into
Retrait
within the Luanda
des
process. These
troupes
are as
rwandaises
follows:
du
the
territoire
withdrawal of
congolais
Rwandan troops from
et mise
Congolese
en œuvre
territory
du
and
plan
the
de
implementation of
démantèlement
the
des
plan
forces
to
démocratiques de
dismantle
libération du
the
Rwanda.
Democratic Forces for the Liberation of
Enfin,
Rwanda, the
la France tient
FDLR.
à réaffirmer
Finally,
avec
France
force son
wishes to
soutien à la
forcefully
MONUSCO.
reaffirm its support for
Son mandat a
MONUSCO.
été renouvelé à
MONUSCO's
l'unanimité
mandate
le
was
20 décembre
unanimously
dernier. Nous
renewed rather on
condamnons
the
les
20th of
attaques
December.
menées
We
par le
condemn
M23 à
attacks
son encontre
waged by
qui ont
M23
conduit
against
à la
MONUSCO.
mort de plusieurs
These
casques bleus ces derniers jours.
attacks have
Nous
claimed the lives of
exprimons nos
several blue
condoléances à
helmets
leurs
in
familles.
recent days. We convey our
Les personnels
condolences to their
des emprises des
family
Nations Unies
members.
doivent être respectés.
Personnel and
Les attaques
undertakings
contre
of the
les casques
United
bleus,
Nations must be
ainsi que des
respected.
civils et
Attacks
des
against blue
personnels
helmets,
humanitaires
civilians
sont
and
susceptibles de
humanitarian
constituer
personnel
des
are
crimes de
liable to
guerre.
constitute war
Un accès
crimes.
humanitaire complet doit être garanti et les
Comprehensive
violations
humanitarian
du
access
droit
must be
international
guaranteed.
humanitaire et des droits
Violations
de
of
l'homme
IHL and
doivent
human
être
rights
condamnées.
must be
La
condemned.
France condamne à
France
nouveau le
once
déploiement de
again
systèmes de
condemns the
missiles solaires et
deployment
du
of
brouillage des
service-to-air
signaux GPS
missiles
sur
and the
les zones
scrambling of
contrôlées
GPS
par le
signals in
M23
areas under
avec le soutien
M23
direct
control
des
with the
forces
direct
rwandaises de
support
défense.
of the Rwanda
La
Defense
MONUSCO doit
Force.
pouvoir
MONUSCO
continuer à
must
mener
be
son
able
action
to
pour
continue to
protéger
do its
les
work to
populations.
protect
La
civilians.
situation à Goma
The situation in
emporte des
Goma
conséquences
has
humanitaires et politiques
major
majeures.
humanitarian and
Nous
political
assurerons
ramifications.
que ce
We will
Conseil
ensure
reste
that this
pleinement
council
mobilisé
remains fully
face à la gravité de
mobilized
cette
in view
situation.
of just how grave
Je vous
this
remercie.
situation is. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+ members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. At the outset, we pay tribute to the brave peacekeepers, MONUSCO personnel, and other UN staff who are risking their lives in pursuit of peace and the protection of civilians in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We also honor those peacekeepers and SAMI DRC personnel who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service of peace. Our deepest condolences go to their families and to the government and people of South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay. We express our gratitude to Ms. Viviane van der Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations in MONUSCO, for a comprehensive briefing on the dire situation on the ground. We also welcome the participation of Her Excellency Therese Wagner, State Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the DRC, as well as the representatives of all other participating states in this meeting. Mr. President, we commend the swift convening of this emergency meeting. In less than 72 hours, the Security Council has convened for a second time to address the rapidly evolving situation in Eastern DRC. The A3+ is deeply concerned about the volatility of the situation, the ongoing conflict, and the resulting stalemate, which present a high risk of a broader regional conflict. We have listened attentively to Ms. van der Peer's briefing, and it is clear that the people of Goma, and indeed the wider Congolese population, deserve more than a temporary cessation of the M23/AFC offensive. They need the guns to be silent through a comprehensive political process that will not only end their suffering, but also guarantee respect for the DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this regard, we make the following point. First, we call for an immediate de-escalation of the tension and a restoration of calm in Goma. We urge the M23/AFC to cease its advances and for all parties to exercise the utmost restraint to ensure the protection of civilians. Given the unpredictable and volatile nature of the situation in Goma and surrounding areas, it is imperative that all efforts, whether from MONUSCO or other actors, focus on safeguarding the population from harm. Given Goma's critical role in facilitating access to the region, all efforts to protect civilians must also address the need for humanitarian access, as well as the safety and security of UN peacekeepers and SAMI DRC personnel. The M23/AFC must refrain from obstructing humanitarian assistance or closing humanitarian corridors. The A3+ stresses the critical need for uninterrupted aid to reach the most vulnerable and reminds all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilian lives and ensure the delivery of aid to those in need. Second, as we have stated before, the situation in Eastern DRC will not be resolved through military means. It requires a political solution, supported by diplomacy and regional cooperation. Since our last meeting on Sunday, we have seen significant African diplomatic efforts to support the Congolese people and encourage both the DRC and Rwanda to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. We recognize the leadership of President William Ruto of Kenya, who has called for an East African Community meeting that will take place in the coming hours. Earlier today, the African Union Peace and Security Council convened an emergency ministerial meeting in Addis Ababa. These regional efforts are commendable, but what is needed now is the commitment of both Rwanda and the DRC to engage in direct negotiations under the Luanda process in good faith with the support of all these initiatives to bring a prompt resolution to the situation in Goma. We strongly call on both Rwanda and DRC to fully engage under the Luanda process, which is being led by the African Union's designated mediator, His Excellency João Lourenço, President of Angola, to resolve the outstanding issues between them. We are aware that the longer this deadlock persists, the greater the risk of further escalation, which will become increasingly difficult to contain. If the political leadership of Rwanda and the DRC can engage in direct talks, there is hope for delivering much-needed relief to the Congolese people. Third, to achieve a lasting solution that fully respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, while also addressing Rwanda's security concerns, it is critical for both countries to fully implement their commitment under the Luanda process. The A3+ remains convinced that the Luanda process offers the best pathway to peace in the DRC. Through this process, a ceasefire agreement was reached, though regrettably breached, along with an agreement on a harmonized plan, reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism, and a comprehensive concept of operations. The A3+ calls on all parties to honor their commitment under the Luanda process. Given the unfortunate development on the ground, and in pursuit of peace and stability in the DRC and the wider region, the A3+ urges the government of Rwanda to withdraw its troops from DRC territories without preconditions and without delay, and to cease its reported support to the M23 AFC. Similarly, we urge the government of the DRC to sever its ties with FDLR and to implement its commitment to neutralize this group. We also regret that President Lourenço of Angola had no choice but to evacuate members of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism due to the untenable security situation in Eastern DRC. While the ceasefire agreement has been violated, the mechanism remains incomplete and has not been fully operationalized. Fourth, the natural wealth of the DRC must translate into prosperity for its people. All actors, both local and external, who continue to illegally exploit the country's resources and fuel the conflict must be held accountable. Mr. President, the A3+ expresses deep concern and regret over the reported attacks on embassies in Kinshasa amidst protests relating to the M23 AFC rebel group's offensive in Eastern DRC. These acts against diplomatic missions and their personnel violate international law. As we acknowledge the legitimate concerns of the Congolese people regarding the security situation in Eastern DRC and the activities of the M23 rebel group, we call for the protection of diplomatic missions and strongly urge all parties to refrain from violence, respect diplomatic norms, and exercise restraint. Peaceful and constructive engagement remains the most effective way to address these pressing issues. In closing, we are all well aware of the critical importance of Goma to the Congolese people. Goma is the heart of the DRC. Allowing this vital city to remain under the control of a rebel group sends a disturbing message about the ability or willingness of the international community to prevent threats to international peace and security from flourishing. It is a moral imperative for all actors, including this Council, to act decisively to address the unfolding situation in Goma and to tackle the structural root causes of this conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking DSOSG Van der Peer for briefing us today. And I welcome the participation of DRC Foreign Minister Wagner, alongside other representatives from the region and troop-contributing countries. President, the UK is deeply alarmed by the events that have unfolded in Eastern DRC. Since we met on Sunday, M23, with support from the Rwandan Defence Forces, have closed in on Goma. M23 have declared that it is now under their control. The humanitarian impacts are dire. The advances have displaced close to 1 million people in North and South Kivu. Civilian casualties are rising. Hundreds of thousands of people who have already fled from M23's advances, many of them several times before, are now on the move again, with virtually nowhere safe to go. How many times must they pack up their lives and flee? The cycle must end. The UK is also deeply concerned by the limited ability of humanitarian actors to get help to those who need it. Key humanitarian routes, land, water and air, are closed, and hospitals are overcrowded, with staff risking their own lives to provide emergency assistance. More than 800,000 people in the area who were prioritised for support may no longer receive vital food and nutritional assistance. We call on the parties not to obstruct the vital services that humanitarians are providing, and to cease hostilities and uphold the protection of humanitarian workers, as required in international humanitarian law. We also urge all parties to consider essential humanitarian corridors to allow the resupply and delivery of essential life-saving items and the freedom and safe movement of civilians and humanitarian actors. President, the UK is also deeply concerned by the continued endangering of peacekeepers' lives. On Sunday, I expressed my condolences to the families of the 13 who'd already been killed. Since then, 4 more peacekeepers have tragically been killed. We urge an immediate end to this violence. We commend the leadership of MONUSCO, your courage under fire, and we thank you for the vital work of the mission. Finally, President, the UK's Foreign Secretary and Minister for Africa have spoken with Rwanda at the highest levels, as well as with wider partners in the region. And we have made clear that there can be no military solution. We urge all parties to cease hostilities and return to diplomatic talks immediately without preconditions. We remain committed to ensuring this Council takes the necessary action to support an end to this conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
благодарим
we'd
заместителя
like to thank the
спецпредставителя
Deputy
Генерального
Special
секретаря
Representative of the Secretary General, Vivian van der Per, for her briefing.
Приветствуем
We
участие в заседании
welcome
министра
to
иностранных
the
дел
meeting the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Teresa Vanga, and the representative of the other countries who've requested the floor under Rule 37. Distinguished colleagues, 2 days ago we met in this chamber and discussed the worrisome developments in the situation in the eastern DRC. Over the past 48 hours, the situation has significantly deteriorated, especially with the seizure of Goma, where there are more than 1 million civilians located. Russia firmly condemns the actions of M23. We call for a swift cessation of hostilities and a withdrawal of the rebels of the illegal armed formation from the towns, villages and territory they have seized. We also urge external forces to cease their support for M23 and to recall their military units. There's a need without delay to resume the negotiation process in Luanda. We must not allow a spillover of the escalation which could threaten the lives of people on both sides of the border and is likely to turn into an interstate conflict on a regional scale. We are seriously concerned by the humanitarian repercussions of what's going on. In front of our very eyes, the already difficult situation in North Kivu is turning into an utter humanitarian disaster. Goma de facto is cut off from the outside world. This may have serious consequences for the inhabitants of the town and the IDPs who have fled there. Once again, we would like to express our condolences to the families of the civilian victims of the DRC, the UN peacekeepers, and the fallen SADC soldiers. We stand in solidarity with the governments of the DRC and those states who've lost their service personnel. We wish them a speedy recovery. We'd like to underscore that Russia unequivocally condemns the attacks on peacekeepers. It's absolutely unacceptable. We firmly support the UN peacekeeping mission in the stabilization mission in the DRC, its leadership, and the Blue Helmets. We also condemn any attacks and acts of aggression regarding international diplomatic representation. Such actions have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with peaceful demonstrations. We urge Kinshasa to ensure the protection of foreign missions and diplomatic staff, pursuant to the Vienna Convention and its international obligations. The violence in eastern DRC needs to stop. However, there's no military path to resolve this crisis. It is absolutely clear that this is only possible as a result of political agreements. We're convinced that the Luanda process remains the best forum where agreements can be reached. We carefully listened to the representative of Angola during the meeting of the Council on Sunday. Angola clearly stated that the only obstacle to preventing a signature of a reconciliation document between Kinshasa and Kigali was the issue of cessation of government interaction with the illegal armed formations, and primarily with the M23. Without settling the status of this group as part of the intra-Congolese dialogue, any attempts to improve the situation between the DRC and Rwanda will not bear lasting fruit. Here, there is an urgent need for the resumption of the Nairobi process and the pushing forward of similar regional initiatives. There's no alternative to this. Mr. President, attempts to settle the crisis will also not bear fruit if the countries of the Great Lakes region do not take decisive measures to combat the illegal exploitation and smuggling of natural resources, the lion's share of which, as we all know, come from the eastern DRC, which is beset by instability. There's a need for extra-regional players and large transnational corporations to review their relationship with the use of these resources, because in their interest there's this ongoing illegal supply of blood minerals. The states have all instruments available to them to stop the hot phase, so to speak, of the conflict and to exert pressure on the parties so they return to negotiations. They must be harnessed to protect people's lives and to stop the suffering of hundreds of thousands of civilians. Unfortunately, we've all seen that the statement of the Council has not stopped the M23 and those who support this group from seizing Goma and continuing their hostilities. Russia, from its side, will do everything possible, including through here in the Council, to stop the escalation and to restore prospects for diplomatic settlement in the interest of stabilizing the situation in the eastern DRC. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, DSRSG, Vivian Van de Peer, for your briefing on the unacceptable events of the last 48 hours. The United States condemns the seizure of Goma and urges this Council to consider measures to halt the territorial advances by Rwandan troops and M23. We stand in firm support of the Congolese people and of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, and urge Rwanda to respect the same. At the same time, we are watching with concern and deplore the destruction of diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa and call on the DRC government to respect its obligations to protect diplomatic premises and personnel. We call for an immediate ceasefire, an end to this fighting. Rwanda must withdraw troops from the DRC. Rwanda and the DRC must return to the negotiating table and work toward a sustainable, peaceful solution. We remain deeply concerned about the human rights abuses, displacement, and other impacts on Congolese civilians suffering the brunt of this fighting. Civilians, including the growing number of IDPs and refugees in Sake, Goma, and beyond, must be protected. More than ever, humanitarian actors must be allowed to operate freely and deliver life-saving aid. The rights of all Goma's inhabitants, including former combatants, must be respected. We are similarly concerned that M23's and Rwanda's ongoing advances are opening up a bloody new front to this conflict in South Kivu, which no longer benefits from the roles MONUSCO assumed in the past to protect civilians and facilitate humanitarian assistance. We must not allow this violence to spiral into a wider regional conflict, which would incur a horrific human toll. We mourn all the Congolese who have lost their lives in this fighting. We also extend heartfelt condolences to the countries and families of UN peacekeepers and Sami DRC troops lost during these attacks. We applaud MONUSCO for its commitment to protect civilians and the bravery and professionalism demonstrated by peacekeepers in recent weeks. As we have said before, Rwanda's support to M23 remains wholly at odds with its robust support to UN peacekeeping. Rwanda said on Sunday that it means no harm to MONUSCO, but 3 peacekeepers have been killed, with many more injured. Additionally, UN and humanitarian personnel, as well as civilians, are endangered by Rwanda's ongoing use of GPS interference and deployment of advanced weapons and systems. Hope is not lost. There is an end in sight to this fighting and a path for a regional dialogue, but the international community must act now. Those unwilling to return to the negotiating table must face a clear and unambiguous response from the Council. We must abandon the delusion of short-term military solutions and work instead toward a durable peace powered by regional economic arrangements for the Great Lakes' vast mineral wealth to ensure stability and prosperity for local populations. Addressing historical grievances, ending ethnic attacks, and other roots of this conflict must be done through a process that has clear incentives and unmistakable accountability. The international community has the tools in hand to end the fighting and build sustainable solutions to the Eastern DRC conflict. We must collectively marshal the will to leverage such tools, as the United States is fully prepared to do, or be prepared to accept unthinkable cost, measured in human lives. Indeed, as the United States observed at our briefing on Sunday, we will consider all the tools at our disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, dear SRG Van der Peer, for your briefing on this serious and evolving situation. I welcome this presence of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner at this meeting. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council convened urgently to address the situation in Eastern DRC. We were briefed on the dramatic escalation of Goma on a knife's edge, of peacekeepers being killed and civilians fleeing. Today, the situation has continued to deteriorate. Let me be clear. Denmark strongly condemns the ongoing offensive by M23 with support of the Rwanda Defense Forces and the military presence of Rwanda in DRC. We demand that M23, supported by the RDF, immediately halt and reverse their territorial expansion and withdraw. We demand that Rwanda ceases its support to the M23 and that the DRC ceases its support to the FDLR. Colleagues, we've all seen the devastating images. Shelling and heavy artillery in the city center of Goma, civilians fleeing, overcrowded hospitals, and ongoing looting. Denmark is extremely concerned about the risk of urban conflict, as well as sexual violence following the influx of armed elements and the Goma prison escape. Likewise, we are deeply alarmed by the risk of attacks against human rights defenders who now fear individual persecution and ethnically motivated attacks. We also express our deep concern with the recent attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. This is unacceptable. Mr. President, against this dangerous and rapidly developing backdrop, allow me to highlight 4 key points. First, Denmark demands an immediate cessation of hostilities, as well as unhindered, rapid and safe humanitarian access to all populations in and around Goma. This includes open humanitarian corridors, open land borders, and airspace. This cannot be understated. In line with international humanitarian law, medical and humanitarian personnel must be protected, and their ability to provide life-saving care must be ensured. Parties must engage with the UN humanitarian actors for deconfliction purposes and allow trauma and specialized medical teams urgent access. Upholding IHL is not an option, it's an obligation. Second, Denmark firmly condemns any form of violence targeting civilians and objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian populations. We demand their immediate protection and the respect for human rights, regardless of ethnic group, gender, or age. Perpetrators of any attack against civilians must be held to account, no matter their rank or affiliation. Third, we express our full support to MONUSCO as it fulfills its critical mandate facing extremely difficult circumstances. We remind the parties that any involvement in attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers may constitute a war crime and a basis for sanctioned designations pursuant to United Nations Security Council resolutions. Fourth, Mr. President, as we underlined just 2 days ago, there is no military solution to this conflict, only a political one. We urge DRC and Rwanda to immediately and in good faith fully re-engage and fully recommit to diplomatic talks in the regional peace processes in place. The Luanda and Nairobi processes are the means to solve this conflict. Colleagues, we are not here merely to request that the parties uphold their obligations under international law. When these obligations are consistently violated, it is incumbent upon us to consider all appropriate tools at the Council's disposal. Mr. President, to conclude, the people of the DRC deserve peace. The peoples of the Great Lake region deserve peace. As the UN body charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, this Council should act decisively in support of this goal. Count on Denmark's support. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Algeria for convening this urgent meeting. We also thank Ms. van der Peer for her briefing. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council condemned the advances of M23 and demanded that the offensive and advances towards Goma immediately stop. Unfortunately, the developments since then have only confirmed our fears. Mr. President, the M23's continued offensive, including the seizure of Goma, with support from Rwanda Defense Forces, is a clear threat to regional stability. We strongly condemn these actions. Slovenia renews its demand for the immediate ceasefire and the unconditional withdrawal of M23 from the occupied territories. The risk of this conflict escalating into a wider regional crisis must not be underestimated, and recent developments have only amplified these fears. Our message is clear. The violence must stop, and diplomacy must take the lead. Slovenia continues to call on Rwanda to fully withdraw its forces from the DRC territory in accordance with international law and to cease its support to M23. We strongly condemn the ongoing violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. They must be respected. We also continue to call on the DRC to cease all cooperation with the FDLR and other armed groups. We are gravely alarmed by the escalating risks in Goma and its surroundings, with the risks of urban fighting and the use of heavy weapons in densely populated areas. There is no time to waste. Mr. President, this is yet another nightmare chapter in this ongoing conflict, forcing hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee, too many of them not for the first time. They are living in fear, they are hungry, they are exposed to vulnerabilities which are further intensified by the presence and influx of armed elements. Restoring and returning to an agreed ceasefire is imperative, but immediate measures are also needed to protect civilians, humanitarian and medical facilities, critical infrastructure, including electricity, water, and communication networks. Safe humanitarian corridors must enable aid delivery and civilian evacuations. Heavy weapons and troops must be withdrawn from the IDP sites. We cannot stress this enough. International humanitarian aid and international humanitarian and human rights law must be upheld by all parties at all times. We call on both countries to exercise maximum restraint. We remain hopeful that strong African engagement through the African Union, the East African Community, and the Luanda processes can help turn the tide through dialogue, and we commend these efforts. Strengthened by this Council, continued engagement, and bilateral efforts, these actions highlight the value of complementing all paths to peace, and Slovenia fully supports them. We urge Rwanda and the DRC to heed calls for peace from the region and the wider international community, and especially those fleeing bullets and bombs, to de-escalate and re-engage in a diplomatic process. Mr. President, we strongly support MONUSCO and its vital mission to protect civilians and recall the need to ensure their safety and security. We unequivocally condemn all attacks and threats against MONUSCO personnel, humanitarian and medical workers who, even as we speak, continue to carry out their life-saving work under fire. In closing, Mr. President, let me express Slovenia's grave concern over the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. Any such actions are entirely unacceptable and a clear violation of international law. We call for the protection of diplomatic missions in strict accordance with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency meeting following Sundays. I thank Deputy SRSG Van de Per for her sobering briefing. I welcome Minister Wagner of the DRC. At the outset, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its steadfast support for MONUSCO and the regional and sub-regional organizations for their tireless efforts in addressing this perilous crisis. We also reiterate our firm commitment to ensuring the safety and security of MONUSCO peacekeepers. At the same time, we strongly condemn the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and urgently call for their immediate cessation. We urge the DRC government to fulfill its obligations under international law by ensuring the protection of all diplomatic missions within its territory. Mr. President, I would like to underscore 3 points today as we confront the devastating and fluid developments on the ground. First, we deeply regret that the unified call of the Security Council during Sunday's meeting, and along with the subsequent press statement, has been blatantly disregarded by the M23 and Rwanda. We demand that the M23 immediately halts its unjustifiable military actions in eastern DRC and withdraw from its offensive in Goma. Their reckless actions are forcing civilians to flee with no safe refuge, endangering hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. Equally critical, we urge Rwanda to refrain from further escalating the conflict. We must once again stress our urgent appeal to Rwanda to cease all forms of support to M23 and promptly withdraw any unauthorized military presence from DRC territory. These actions undermine the foundational principles of the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Second, the Security Council must consider all measures at its disposal to bring an end to this devastating conflict. The Council must deliver a more decisive and unequivocal message. In addition, concrete actions must be pursued to effectively influence the strategic calculations of the parties involved in the conflict. We must recall that it was a strong diplomatic pressure that stopped the M23 back in 2012. A thorough investigation into the attacks against the peacekeepers is also vital. The safety and security of UN peacekeepers is a top priority for the Security Council. All perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian and international human rights laws, including sexual and gender-based violence, must also be held accountable. Third, both the DRC and Rwanda must return to meaningful negotiations and fully honor their obligations under the Rwanda process. We reaffirm our full support for President Lourenço of Angola in his critical mediation efforts. We also look forward to the African Union Peace and Security Council playing a key role in exerting necessary pressure following its emergency ministerial meeting held this morning. Furthermore, we encourage sustained and coordinated pressure from all regional and international actors at the highest levels of government to help urgently de-escalate this conflict. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Security Council must take action. Most importantly, we must not lose sight of the innocent civilians who, even as we meet here today, are awaiting the Council's action. The Republic of Korea remains steadfast in its commitment to constructive engagement, working collectively to swiftly and decisively overturn the consequences of unlawful military actions. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. At the outset, President, I'd like to thank you for convening this emergency meeting. I thank DSSG Vanderberg for the briefing. I welcome the Foreign Minister, Akubwe Bwatagya of DRC, to the meeting today. Since Council's Sunday consideration of the situation in Eastern DRC, the ground situation has taken a nosedive. M23 overran Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, causing massive civilian displacement and increasing the risk of a greater conflict. The developments are deeply worrying. China reiterates our firm support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and opposition to any violations of the UN Charter and international law. China demands that M23 to immediately cease all hostilities and withdraw from Goma and other occupied areas. China hopes that Rwanda attaches importance to the calls from SD Guterres and relevant African countries. Stop military support for M23 and immediately withdraw all its military forces from the territory of the DRC. We urge parties to the conflict to abide by international humanitarian law and to protect the security of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, the security of foreign nationals and institutions in DRC should be protected too. China once again strongly condemns M23's attacks against UN peacekeepers. We salute MONUSCO for sticking to its post under extremely dangerous circumstances and support its continued activities, including protection of the civilians pursuant to the mandate of the Security Council. We reiterate that any attacks targeting UN peacekeepers are unacceptable and urge parties to refrain from any actions that may endanger peacekeeping camps and peacekeepers. President, it should be underscored that there is no military solution to the issue of Eastern DRC and that diplomatic negotiations are the only way out. China supports the leaders of Angola, South Africa, Kenya, among others, in conducting emergency communication with countries concerned, and welcome East African Community's announcement of a forthcoming emergency meeting. We call on Rwanda and the DRC to return to the track of diplomatic dialogue as soon as possible and to implement the mutual commitments made under the Luanda process, including commitments to neutralizing FDLR. We hope the two countries can actively respond to the mediation efforts of the international community and regional countries and maintain dialogue and negotiations to resolve concerns. At present, the situation in Eastern DRC is at a critical juncture fraught with peril. China supports the Security Council in keeping its unity, taking necessary actions to create favorable conditions to prevent the situation from worsening further and to push for political settlement. I thank you.
There's DI.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
I thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank you for convening this meeting on this urgent topic. We thank Deputies SRSG Vivian van der Peer for her valuable briefing. We also welcome the participation of the Foreign Minister of the DRC in this meeting, as well as the permanent representatives of Rwanda, Uruguay, Angola, Guatemala, Zimbabwe, and Burundi. Mr. President, since we met on Sunday, the M23 has largely seems to be in control of Goma. Thousands of people are currently fleeing their homes, adding to the millions already internally displaced in eastern DRC. Many UN and other peacekeeping troops are still encountering mortar and small arms fire. 3 UN peacekeepers have lost their lives and 22 have been injured. Sami DRC has also taken fatalities and casualties. We once again express our deepest condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and pay tribute to their bravery, and especially those who died in the line of duty. I would like to make the following points. First, we strongly condemn M23's offensive on Goma. It must immediately stop its advance and vacate all territories it has occupied. We condemn the violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. All foreign forces must be withdrawn from the territory of the DRC. Second, the M23 siege of Goma has grave humanitarian consequences. The UN Secretariat and other humanitarian actors, in consultations with the DRC, should urgently develop a plan for the protection of civilians, the handling of internally displaced people, and addressing the humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC. The M23 must not impede access for immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian aid and humanitarian personnel to the affected areas and to the affected people, including through humanitarian corridors. Third, we strongly condemn the continued attacks on the peacekeepers. Attacks on peacekeepers constitute war crimes, and those responsible for perpetrating, supporting, and sponsoring these attacks must be held accountable. At the same time, we deplore the attacks on diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa. We ask the UN Secretariat and MONUSCO, in consultations with the DRC, to urgently present an effective plan to ensure the safety and security of MONUSCO and other peacekeepers, including through the steps that they have already taken. Fourth, we stress that there is no military solution to the conflict in eastern DRC. We call on Rwanda and the DRC to cease hostilities and to immediately revive the Luanda process of dialogue under the mediatory leadership of President Lorenzo of Angola. The understandings reached under this process, that is the neutralization of the FDLR and the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from DRC, should be maintained and implemented even as the challenge posed by the M23 is confronted and resolved. We hope that the reconciliation within DRC will be achieved, especially through the Nairobi process. We also extend our full support to the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region in promoting dialogue to resolve the conflict in eastern DRC. Fifth, we appreciate the communiqué issued today by the African Peace and Security Council on the situation in DRC, in eastern DRC. African institutions would no doubt have to play a very important role in bringing the decades-old conflict to an end in accordance with the call for African solutions to African problems and silencing the guns. Sixth, the Security Council and the Secretary General will need to evaluate the future role of MONUSCO in the evolving circumstances in Eastern DRC. In our view, the mission must be maintained and its mandate reviewed and adapted to respond to the new circumstances and operating environment. The mission will need to be adequately reinforced and equipped to discharge its current or modified mandate. Finally, Mr. President, we once again call to address the issue of the illegal exploitation of the DRC's natural resources, which is the root cause of this conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Ms. Van der Per, Deputy SRSG, for briefing us on this urgent meeting today and commend the courage of all of MONUSCO's personnel in these very difficult circumstances. I would also like to welcome the participation of the Honourable Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in our meeting. Mr. President, allow me to emphasize 4 key points. First, we strongly condemn the capture of the town of Sake on January 23rd and the invasion of Goma on January 27th by M23. We reiterate that the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the DRC must be fully respected. The presence of Rwandan troops on the territory of DRC and the support to the M23, as also stated by the Secretary General on January 26, are very concerning and are strongly condemned. We call on Rwanda to cease its support to the M23 and to withdraw its forces now. Second, we call for urgent de-escalation, and we stress that it is more imperative than ever that particularly Rwanda and DRC commit to the ceasefire as agreed last August, re-engage the political dialogue, and implement all decisions and commitments agreed under the Luanda process. Greece will continue to support African-led initiatives and welcomes the emergency ministerial session on the conflict in Eastern DRC convened today by the African Union Peace and Security Council and the upcoming meeting of SADC tomorrow. We call DRC and Rwanda to return immediately to the table of negotiations. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian and security consequences of the M23 offensive in North Kivu. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access. We strongly condemn all forms of human rights violations, abuses, violence against civilians, sex and gender-based violence in particular. Fourth, we reiterate our full support to MONUSCO, which is acting within its mandate and doing critical work in the DRC, including in the area of Goma, stress a strong commitment to the safety and security of its peacekeepers, condemns the attacks committed against personnel, and offer condolences to the families and government of the deceased peacekeepers. MONUSCO must be granted full access and freedom of movement to effectively fulfill its mandate and address urgent needs. The protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel must remain an absolute priority. Attacks against peacekeepers may constitute potential war crimes, and those attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers form also a basis for potential sanction designations. Mr. President, we stand ready to consider any further engagement of this Council as unnecessary. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, señor
Thank you very
presidente.
much indeed,
Damos la
Mr.
más cordial
President.
bienvenida a
We
la
warmly
representante especial
welcome
adjunta de
the Deputy
MONUSCO,
Special
la señora
Representative
Vivian Van der Per. Le
MONUSCO,
agradecemos por su
Ms.
presentación
Vivian
informativa
Van der Per. We thank
y
her for her
también
briefing.
a la participación
We also
de la ministra de
welcome
Relaciones
the Minister
Exteriores,
for
Su
Foreign
Excelencia
Affairs,
Thérèse
Her
Kayikwamba
Excellency Ms.
Wagner,
Thérèse
desde la
Kayikwamba
República
Wagner
Democrática del Congo.
of the
Señor presidente,
DRC.
distinguidos
Mr.
miembros del
President,
Consejo de
distinguished
Seguridad,
members of the Security
Panamá
Council,
expresa su
Panama
profunda
expresses
preocupación
great
por la
concern
alarmante
at the alarming
situación que se
situation
desarrolla en la
currently
República
playing out
Democrática
in the
del Congo.
Democratic Republic of the
En los
Congo.
últimos
In
días
recent
hemos sido
days, we
testigos
have
de una
witnessed
escalada de
an
violencia
escalation
que ha
of
culminado
violence,
con la
which has
entrada del
culminated
M23
in
en la ciudad de Goma,
M23's entry into the
con
city
el
of
apoyo de
Goma,
las fuerzas
that
de
with the
defensa de
support
Ruanda,
of the Rwanda Defense
según lo
Force.
informado por el grupo de
This
expertos.
was reported on
Esta
by the
ofensiva
group of
ha
experts. That
desencadenado una crisis
offensive
humanitaria de
unleashed a
proporciones devastadoras.
humanitarian crisis of
Miles de
devastating
civiles
proportions.
se han
Thousands
visto
of
obligados a
civilians
abandonar
have
sus
been
hogares,
forced to flee their
buscando
homes,
refugio en
seeking
condiciones
refuge
precarias y
volatile
enfrentando la
conditions,
suspensión
and
de
they're now
servicios
facing the
básicos
suspension of
esenciales.
essential basic
La
services.
interrupción de estos
The
servicios ha
suspension of
dejado
these
a la población
services
civil
has
en una
left the
situación de
civilian
vulnerabilidad
population
extrema.
extremely vulnerable.
La falta de
The lack
acceso
of
a agua
access to
potable,
drinking water,
electricidad,
electricity,
atención médica
healthcare,
y otros
and
servicios
other core
esenciales
services
agrava el
is
sufrimiento de los
worsening the
desplazados
suffering
y
of
residentes
displaced persons as
locales.
well as local
El
residents.
Alto Comisionado de las Naciones
The
Unidas
United
para los
Nations High Commissioner for
Refugiados ha expresado su
Refugees
profunda
expressed his
preocupación
grave
por el
concern
agravamiento de la
at
violencia y
the
la crisis
worsening of the
humanitaria
violence
en el
and the
este de la
humanitarian crisis
RDC,
in eastern DRC.
señalando
He
que el número
indicated
de
that the
desplazados
number of
internos
internally displaced
ha aumentado
persons
en más de
has increased
400,000
by
en lo que va
more
del
than
año.
400,000
La
this
República de
year
Panamá
alone.
reitera su
The
rechazo
Republic of
a
Panama
cualquier
reiterates
forma de
its
violencia
repudiation of
que
any
atente
form
contra la
of violence
seguridad e
which
integridad
undermines
física de la
the
población
security and
civil.
physical integrity of the
Hacemos un
civilian
llamado
population.
urgente a
We
todas las
issue
partes
an urgent appeal
involucradas
to all
para que
parties
cesen las
involved to
hostilidades de
cease hostilities
inmediato y
immediately
respeten el derecho
and to adhere
internacional
to
humanitario.
international humanitarian law.
Apoyamos plenamente el
fully
llamado
support the
de las
appeal
entidades de las
issued
Naciones
by
Unidas para
UN
habilitar pausas
entities for the
humanitarias temporales en
authorization
áreas
of
críticas,
temporary
así como para
humanitarian
el
pauses in
establecimiento de
critical
corredores
areas,
humanitarios
as well as
seguros
for the
y
establishment of
efectivos.
safe and effective humanitarian
De igual
corridors.
manera, reiteramos nuestro
Moreover, we
firme
reiterate
respaldo a
our
la
staunch
invaluable
support
labor de la
for the
MONUSCO,
invaluable work
cuyo
done by
compromiso
MONUSCO.
con la paz y la
MONUSCO's
seguridad en
commitment
la
to peace
región
and security
es
in the region
incuestionable.
is beyond doubt.
Reconocemos
We
los complejos
recognize the
desafíos que
complex
enfrenta la
challenges
misión
facing the
en un
mission
entorno
in
altamente
a highly
inestable y
unstable
apreciamos
environment,
profundamente
and
sus
we
incansables
deeply
esfuerzos para
appreciate the
proteger a la
mission's
población
tireless
civil
efforts to
y
protect
fortalecer
civilians and
las
to
instituciones del
strengthen
Estado de Derecho.
institutions of the
Señor
rule of law.
presidente, el domingo durante
Mr.
la sesión de
President,
emergencia,
on Sunday
Panamá
during the
expresó su
emergency meeting,
solidaridad
Panama
y
expressed its
acompañamiento a los
solidarity
cascos
with and
azules y
support
sus
for the Blue
familias.
Helmets and their
Es
families.
inaceptable que hoy
It is
nuevamente nos veamos
unacceptable
en la
that today,
terrible
once
situación
again, we find
de tener que
ourselves in the
expresar
terrible situation of
nuevamente
having
nuestro
to
más
once
sentido
again
pésame por la
convey
pérdida de
our
la vida
deepest
de
condolences
4
following
más que
the
murieron en la
loss
línea de
of 4
combate.
more lives on the front
Reconocemos los
lines.
esfuerzos
We
regionales
recognize
que se
efforts
llevan
made
a
at a
cabo para
regional level
enfrentar
that
esta
were made
crisis.
to address
En
this crisis.
particular, destacamos la iniciativa del
In particular, we
presidente de
point to the
Kenia,
initiative
William
taken
Ruto,
by the President of
quien ha
Kenya, William
convocado para
Ruto.
mañana una
He
reunión de
has
emergencia de la
convened
Comunidad de
for
África
tomorrow
del
an
Este
emergency
y
meeting
el
of the
Consejo de Paz y
EAC,
Seguridad de la
and we
Unión Africana.
recognize what's been done by the
Ambas
AU Peace
iniciativas
and
con el
Security
objetivo de
Council. Both
garantizar
initiatives
la
have the
protección de
goal
los
of
civiles y fomentar el
protecting
diálogo sincero entre las
civilians
partes en
and of
conflicto.
fostering candid dialogue between the parties
Señores,
to the conflict.
estamos
Ladies and gentlemen,
observando la
we
escalada
are
de este
witnessing the
conflicto en
escalation of
tiempo
this
real.
conflict in real time.
Es el momento
Now
oportuno para que
is
este
the
Consejo
time
actúe de
for
manera
this council
contundente
to take
con el fin de
decisive
garantizar el
action in
acceso
order to
irrestricto a la ayuda
guarantee
humanitaria
unfettered
y
access to
restablecer los
humanitarian
servicios
aid and
básicos
to
en las
restore
áreas
basic
afectadas.
services in areas affected.
La población congoleña
The
debe
people
recibir el
of the
apoyo de la
DRC
comunidad
must receive the
internacional
international
basado en los
community
principios de la
support
Carta de
in
las Naciones
line with
Unidas
the principles
para
of the
evitar
UN
una crisis
Charter
regional.
to avoid a regional
Reafirmamos nuestro
conflagration.
compromiso
We
inquebrantable
reaffirm our
con la
tireless
soberanía
commitment
e
to the
integridad
sovereignty and
territorial
territorial
de la
integrity
República
of the Democratic
Democrática del
Republic of the
Congo.
Congo.
Exigimos al
We
M23 y a las
demand
fuerzas de
that
defensa de Ruanda
M23
a
and the
detener de
Rwanda
manera
Defense
inmediata
Force
su avance
immediately
y a
cease their
proceder a su
advancement,
retiro
and we
completo,
demand that they
respetando
move to
plenamente
complete
el acuerdo
withdrawal,
del
fully
alto al fuego
respecting the
y los
ceasefire
procesos de
agreement
mediación
and the
en
mediation
curso. Muchas gracias,
processes
señor
underway.
presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You have the floor, Madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du
Mr. President,
Conseil,
distinguished members of
permettez-moi au
the
nom du
Council,
gouvernement
on
et du
behalf
peuple de la
of the
République
government and
démocratique du
people
Congo,
of the Democratic
d'exprimer
Republic
mes
of Congo,
remerciements
I would like to
pour la
convey my
convocation de cette
thanks
seconde réunion
for
en
convening this
48 heures
second meeting in
sur la
48
situation
hours
sécuritaire dans mon
on the
pays.
security situation in my country.
Je tiens à saluer
I would
l'engagement de la
also like
présidence
to
algérienne du
commend
Conseil
the commitment of the Algerian
ainsi que les efforts
presidency of the
constants
Council
de ceux qui,
and the
malgré
ongoing
les vents
efforts of
contraires,
those
œuvrent sans
who,
relâche pour la
despite
paix et
strong
la sécurité
headwinds,
internationale.
are striving unfailingly for
Avant de
international
poursuivre,
peace and
permettez-moi de
security.
saluer le sacrifice
Before I
ultime
continue, I would
consenti
like to
au cours
commend
des
the
dernières
ultimate
48 heures par les
sacrifice
soldats
made
de la paix
over
de
the
la
past
MONUSCO
48 hours
et de la
by
SAMIDIA
peacekeepers of MONUSCO and SAMI DRC in the DRC. I would also like to pay tribute to the courage and resilience of the Congolese armed forces, and I'd like to pay tribute to those Congolese civilians who have been victims of the merciless attack by Rwanda. We, the Democratic Republic of Congo, recognize also the losses amongst Rwandan soldiers during the clashes, whilst Rwanda is obstinately insisting on its false narrative, claiming that it is not conducting a war in the DRC. This stance is very costly to the families of hundreds of Rwandan soldiers
même si leur propre pays refuse de les reconnaître,
even if
de leur
their own
rendre
country
hommage,
refuses to
ou d'accorder à
recognize
leurs
them, to
familles
pay
le droit
tribute
de
to
pleurer
them,
leur perte,
or to allow their
nous,
families to
la
the
République
right to
démocratique du Congo,
mourn
savons
their
combien la
losses.
guerre
We, the
dépasse toutes les
Democratic Republic
frontières.
of Congo,
Nous
are well
reconnaissons que la
aware
folie
that
dans
war
laquelle
crosses
Kigali
all
nous a
borders.
entraînés
We
fait des
recognize that the
victimes partout.
madness that Kigali has
En
plunged
ce
us
qui concerne le
into
mouvement de
has caused
protestation
victims
observé ce
everywhere.
matin dans la ville de
As regards the
Kinshasa, j'aimerais ici rassurer nos partenaires que le gouvernement de la République démocratique du Congo a pris toutes les mesures nécessaires pour assurer la protection des missions diplomatiques accréditées en République démocratique du Congo. Ces incidents, profondément regrettables, ne reflètent en rien l'engagement constant de notre pays envers le respect du droit international et des principes qui régissent les relations diplomatiques. Aujourd'hui, si nous sommes ici encore une fois, en moins de 48 heures, nous devons impérativement avoir le courage de nous poser cette question. Quel impact concret la déclaration de ce Conseil, quel était l'impact concret de la déclaration de ce Conseil du 26 janvier? Monsieur le Président, à Goma, les forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, soutenues par la MONUSCO et les troupes de la SADC, continuent à bravoure à combattre. Mais cette défense héroïque et déterminée ne saurait masquer l'ampleur du drame. Une fois de plus, les soldats de la paix, dont 4 soldats sud-africains de la SAMI DRC, ont payé le prix ultime de leur détermination. Ces victimes de plus ne sont autres que le résultat d'actes criminels constitutifs de crimes contre l'humanité, de crimes de guerre perpétrés par les RDF en toute liberté et sous silence de ce Conseil. Mesdames et messieurs, permettez-moi une parenthèse. Parmi les 4 valeureux casques bleus sud-africains tombés à Goma, l'un d'entre eux n'a pas succombé directement pendant le combat, mais il a succombé à ses blessures. Ce drame illustre tragiquement la réalité actuelle. Des vies se perdent dans une ville assiégée, privée d'électricité, d'eau, de voies d'évacuation. Tel est aujourd'hui le sort de millions de personnes à Goma, piégées, sans accès à l'eau, à l'électricité, à la nourriture ou à un abri sûr. C'est la tragédie partagée par les citoyens congolais ainsi que par des milliers de soldats de la paix et d'humanitaires pris au piège. Je remémore les mots poignants de la représentante spéciale, Mme Bintou Keïta, il y a 2 jours. Nous sommes piégés. We are trapped. Les dernières 24 heures, plus de 100 blessés ont été accueillis dans les centres de santé du Comité international de la Croix-Rouge. Et la situation humanitaire continue à se dégrader, avec plus de 500 000 nouveaux déplacés dans la province du Nord et du Sud Kivu. Pour le mois de janvier uniquement. Les forces de défense rwandaises et leurs supplétifs du M23 ont franchi nos frontières, occupé nos villes et nos villages, chassé nos compatriotes de leur foyer et instauré une administration parallèle, en violation du droit international et ce, en violation des positions claires de ce Conseil. Jusqu'à quand le Rwanda continuera-t-il d'abuser votre respect et de votre autorité? Quel instrument international doit-il encore violer pour que ce Conseil prenne enfin les mesures nécessaires contre Kigali? De la Charte des Nations Unies, au droit international humanitaire, aux droits de l'homme, en passant par les processus de paix de Luanda et de Nairobi, le Rwanda a prouvé que vos déclarations ne lui emportent guère. Le cessez-le-feu du 4 août 2024 n'a été pour lui qu'une chimère,
ceasefire was just a pipe
d'ignorer vos
dream.
avertissements du 26 janvier,
If it
allant
is
jusqu'à
allowed
bombarder
to
des hôpitaux et des
ignore
maisons dans la ville de Goma.
warnings of the 26th
Pas
of
plus tard que
January,
dimanche le 26
it
janvier,
has done
le
so.
Rwanda,
It has
pays
now bombed
contributeur en groupe
hospitals
des Nations
and
Unies, par le truchement de
homes
son
in Goma.
représentant,
On the
a considéré ce
26th of
Conseil
January, Rwanda,
comme complice de sa
a troop
déstabilisation,
contributing country of the
allant
UN,
jusqu'à associer la
because of its
MONUSCO à cette
stubbornness, has
démarche
considered the
invraisemblable.
Council
Si cette stratégie a porté des fruits
complicit
par
in
le
its
passé, le
destabilization,
temps de la
and
manipulation
it,
et du
in fact,
mensonge
associated
est
MONUSCO
désormais révolu.
with this.
La vie de la population
Whilst this
civile,
may have borne
privée de
fruit in the
moyens de
past, the
subsistance
time of
depuis maintenant
manipulation
4
and
jours à
lies
Goma
is now
dépend
over.
des
The
décisions
lives
que
of
vous
civilians
devez prendre
deprived
aujourd'hui.
of the very means of
Nous ne sommes pas
subsistance
venus
for
aujourd'hui
4
pour vous
days
dire
now
ce
in Goma
que
depends
vous
on
ne
the
connaissez
decisions
pas.
that you are going to
Nous
take
sommes
today.
venus vous demander
We
de
have not
prendre le
come
courage de
to
faire
tell
ce
you
qui est
about things
droit
that you don't know about, but we've come
et
to
ce qui
ask
est
you
dans
to
vos
be
prérogatives.
courageous enough
Les vies des
to do
civils
what
ne
is
peuvent pas
right
être
and
pendues
to uphold
à la
your
machinerie
prerogatives. The
politicienne
lives
qui
of
observe
civilians
sans agir.
cannot be
Nous exigeons des
suspended
actions.
in this machinery
Reconnaître la
that just
responsabilité du
doesn't
Rwanda dans les violations
respond.
multiples
We
de
are
notre souveraineté,
urging that you take
ainsi que dans
strong
les atrocités
actions,
qu'il commet, a été
recognize the
insuffisant
responsibility of
pour qu'il
Rwanda in
cesse
the
sa
multiple
poursuite du conflit.
violations of our sovereignty as
Les
well as the
victimes ne
atrocities
sont
that
plus
it's
seulement
committing.
congolaises.
It was
Le Rwanda a
not
frappé
enough for
l'Afrique et
it
l'Amérique latine
to stop
en
its
tuant des militaires
ongoing conflict.
sud-africains, malawites et uruguayens
And now
venus
victims
protéger
are
les
not only
civils.
from
Il a
Congo.
frappé ce
Rwanda
conseil en
has
tuant
struck
des casques
Africa and
bleus de la
Latin
MONUSCO.
America by killing
N'est-ce pas une preuve
South
suffisante pour
African,
vous
Malawi,
que
Uruguayan
lors de
servicemen
chacune
come
des
to
réunions
protect
convoquées par ce
civilians?
Conseil,
It has
la
struck
liste
the
des
council
orateurs
by
regorge de
killing
pays
the
d'Afrique
blue
et d'ailleurs,
helmets of
cherchant à vous
MONUSCO.
pousser à
Surely
agir.
this is evidence
Dimanche,
enough.
c'était l'Afrique du Sud, le
You
Burundi,
had a list of
l'Uruguay.
speakers from
Aujourd'hui encore, nous
Africa,
sommes rejoints dans un esprit de
urging you
solidarité
to
par nos
act
frères et
on
sœurs de
Sunday.
l'Angola, de
On
l'Afrique du
Sunday, it
Sud,
was
de
South
l'Uruguay, du
Africa,
Guatemala,
Burundi,
du
Uruguay.
Zimbabwe, du
Today
Sénégal,
we're
du
joined
Burundi.
with
Tous
there is
ont
Burundi,
répondu,
South Africa, but also
car
Lesotho and Malawi.
l'humanité est en jeu.
Everybody's responded to this
Tous
call
sont
because
venus
it's
voir ce que vous allez
humanity that's
faire.
at stake here. Everybody has come
À
to
quel seuil de
see what you're
catastrophe
going to do.
humanitaire et de
What
violation
is the
flagrante
degree
de
of
notre
humanitarian
territoire
disaster and
devrez-vous
flagrant
enfin
violations of
agir
our
pour
territory
sanctionner
that
les
needs to be
responsables
achieved for
du
you
M23
to
et les officiers
condemn
rwandais
the
et leurs
perpetrators
complices?
in the M23, the
Si ce Conseil
Rwandan
ne sanctionne
officers
pas,
and
l'histoire
their
marquera ce temps
accomplices.
comme
If
l'époque de
this
l'impuissance
council
et de
does not
l'indifférence du
condemn
Conseil de sécurité.
history, this will
Le
go
droit
down
de
in
rachat de ce
history
Conseil
as a
sur cette
time
crise
of
n'est nulle part
powerlessness
ailleurs
and
que dans
indifference of
les
the
actions
Security
immédiates.
Council.
Et déjà,
And
nous voyons
immediate
venir une
action needs
manœuvre
to be
prévisible.
taken.
Le
But we
Rwanda,
can see a
qui a
predictable
délibérément
move.
dirigé cette
Rwanda
guerre sur le
has
territoire d'un
deliberately
autre État
directed
souverain,
this
le
war
nôtre,
on the
commence à
territory of a
revendiquer
sovereign state.
que les combats
Our
atteignent son
state
propre sol.
is starting
Mais que
to
pouvait-il espérer? Une guerre excellente
state. But what
ne
could
connaît
it
pas de frontières.
expect?
Elle est
Because
sale.
it seems
Elle
that people
consume
are
tout
dying
sur son passage,
elsewhere. But
les
what
forts
is it
comme les
likely to
faibles.
expect?
Les 72
A war
dernières heures
knows
ne sont
no
qu'un échantillon de la
borders.
tragédie
War
régionale
is
qui menace.
dirty. It
Une
is
tragédie que le peuple congolais
all-consuming.
connaît depuis des décennies.
It
Une
takes
tragédie
those who are
nationale
strong,
que
it
ce
takes those who are
Conseil
weak.
peut encore
Over this past
arrêter et une
72
tragédie
hours,
régionale
we've
que ce
seen a
Conseil peut
regional
prévenir par une
tragedy
action résolue et
that
courageuse.
could have been prevented if the Council
Monsieur
had
le
been able to
Président,
take
certains voudraient faire
action.
croire
Some people, sir, would
que
like
l'inaction
to make believe that
est une
inaction
solution
is an
africaine.
African solution.
Nous sommes un pays africain
We are
sous
an
attaque.
African country
Mais
under
cette attaque
attack.
dépasse nos
This
frontières.
attack
Elle
is
est une
going
attaque
beyond
contre
our
le
borders. It is
multilatéralisme,
an attack
contre
on
les principes même des
multilateralism,
Nations Unies,
on the very
contre
principles of
chacun
the
de
United
nous.
Nations,
Laisser
against
cette crise
each
s'enliser
and
sous
every one of
prétexte
us.
qu'elle serait un problème africain,
Allowing this crisis to continue,
nécessitant une solution
stating that
africaine,
it's an
revient à
African
trahir
problem that
l'esprit de
requires an African
solidarité
solution,
internationale qui
betrays the
fonde cette
spirit of
organisation
international solidarity
et
that was the
l'esprit
very
de
bedrock of our
responsabilité de
organization
sécurité
and the spirit of
collective
collective
qui
security
justifie même votre
responsibility
présence comme
that
membre de ce
justifies
Conseil.
your very
Nous
presence as
réitérons
members of
avec
this council.
insistance nos 5
We
demandes urgentes. 1.
reiterate our
Le
5
retrait
urgent
immédiat
demands.
des troupes
1. The
rwandaises.
immediate immediate withdrawal of Rwandan troops and the cessation of hostilities. 2, the establishment of targeted sanctions against the RDF chain of command and the Rwandan political decision makers. 3, the imposition of an embargo on natural resources declared as Rwandan.
4, la révocation du Rwanda en tant que contributeur de troupes aux Nations Unies. On ne peut être à la fois agresseur et prétendre jouer un rôle dans la promotion de la paix. 5, la transparence totale sur les transferts d'armes au Rwanda. Ces transferts doivent être arrêtés immédiatement pour empêcher qu'ils continuent à alimenter la violence et l'instabilité. Monsieur le Président, nous sommes ici parce que c'est ici que le monde doit gérer ses défis. C'est ici, si ce Conseil échoue, la rue va s'en charger. Comme vous le savez, savez très bien, la rue n'a pas d'ordre, ni de tempérament. Il y a 48 heures devant ce Conseil de sécurité, nous avons une nouvelle fois attiré votre attention sur la déclaration de guerre du Rwanda contre mon pays. Une balle qui frappe dans le cœur ne saurait laisser le reste du corps indifférent. La République démocratique du Congo est en guerre et face à cette agression, l'inaction collective semble malheureusement embraser cette situation jusque dans sa capitale. Je réitère ainsi, encore une fois, que le gouvernement de la République démocratique du Congo condamne avec fermeté toute attaque contre les missions diplomatiques accréditées en République démocratique du Congo. Cependant, l'indifférence n'est plus une option. Ce Conseil ne devrait se permettre de rester passif, car chaque jour sans réponse concrète fait grandir le prix du silence. Le moment est venu pour ce Conseil de démontrer son courage et son engagement. L'histoire retiendra vos choix. Que cette Assemblée soit le rempart de la justice et de la dignité humaine. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much indeed.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kaikwamba Wagner for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to once again commend Algeria's able leadership of the Council for the month of January. I'm grateful for your invitation to participate in this important meeting and thank all the member states that spoke before me. I'd like to recognize Ms. Viviane van der Perry, Deputy SRSG. I also recognize Honorable Teresa Kaikwamba Wagner, DRC Minister for Foreign Affairs. I also would like to recognize the participation of the representatives of Angola, Uruguay, Zimbabwe, Burundi, South Africa, Guatemala, and Senegal. Less than 2 days ago, this council gathered to discuss the ongoing situation in the eastern DRC. Since then, it has rapidly evolved. On 26 January, the M23/AFC rebel group is reported to have taken over the city of Goma. This triggered retreating forces from DRC coalition to attack and shell the Rwandan territory. Rwanda condemns in the strongest terms these attacks on the town of Rubavu in the northern province, which killed 5 people, innocent Rwandan civilians, and left another 35 injured. This indiscriminate shelling is unacceptable war crime, and further proof of the necessity of maintaining Rwanda's defensive posture put in place precisely to prevent this kind of threat. I would like to recall that these attacks are not the first, but the latest of a long list of provocative actions by the government of the DRC. I'd like to also recall that Rwanda has always shown restraint and sought to engage the DRC in dealing with the root causes of insecurity in the region and along our common border. Rwanda will always stand for peace.
Stop asking research.
As we have the most to lose in the continuation of this conflict. I have always emphasized that Rwanda knows the dividend of peace. We suffered insecurity. Our nation was almost a failed state. So we have worked hard to build peace and to work for peace in the region. So we are strongly committed to peace, peaceful coexistence, and a peaceful region. The coalition of anti-Rwanda forces on our border poses an existential threat to our country, which is not the case for the government of Kinshasa, which feels insulated from whatever happens 2,000 kilometers away. The border of Rwanda is 2,000 kilometers away from Kinshasa. A shell from across in DRC that falls on Rwandan territory falls on a very densely populated villages, and lives are lost. Even one bullet takes a life. Those in Kinshasa will not stay awake when such insecurity happens. So we are very serious when we talk of an existential security threat to Rwanda. Mr. President, the action of this coalition are equally devastating for Congolese. Rwanda is providing humanitarian relief to incoming refugees together with the help of international partners on the ground. A temporary refugee camp has been set up in Rubavu to provide further assistance and shelter to those who are displaced. In addition, many countries have requested our assistance in facilitating the evacuation of their nationals, including European countries of origin of the mercenaries who have been deployed in Eastern DRC. Rwanda also facilitated the transit of MONUSCO and other United Nations personnel through Kigali. Additionally, the hundreds of militia members and FARDC forces we have received have been disarmed and treated with respect and dignity in accordance with international law, and those who are sick are being treated. I would like here also to express Rwanda's condolences to MONUSCO forces that died in this process. On the contrary, we have been dismayed by the reports of attacks and looting of diplomatic missions in Kinshasa, including the Rwandan embassy and several other embassies of members of this council. These thuggish acts, most of which are committed in the passive presence of DRC security forces, are in total violation of international law, especially the 1961 Vienna Convention. Rwanda therefore calls on the DRC to take its diplomatic obligations seriously and hold perpetrators accountable. I'd like to emphasize that those who followed the media, the Rwandan embassy in Kinshasa was among those that was totally burnt down. Mr. President, the deteriorating security situation in the Eastern DRC has only one immediate cause: the obsession by the President of the DRC for a military solution and thirst for regime change in Rwanda. We have said over and over to this Council. Indeed, this situation could have been solved a long time ago if President Tshisekedi had demonstrated political will and good faith in finding a lasting solution to this conflict. I would like to recall that President Tshisekedi took the unilateral decision to expel the M23 from the political dialogue under the Nairobi process, as well as East African Community Regional Force, which was deployed by EAC. Yet the EAC Regional Force had led to a ceasefire that held for 6 months, which led the M23 to relinquish 80% of the territory it was holding. This was from March 2023 to September 2023. To fill in this vacuum, the DRC instead decided to replace it with a SADC-led force with a more offensive mandate. These two unilateral decisions by President Tshisekedi have caused the Nairobi process to stall, despite numerous attempts to revive it. Mr. President, Council members, as if frustrating the Nairobi process was not enough, the DRC President repeatedly made inflammatory statements against Rwanda. For instance, in December 2022, in a statement addressed to Rwandan youth, he promised to help them, and I quote his exact words, "Get rid of this diabolic regime in Kigali." Those are the President's words. Moreover, in December 2023, during the last campaign, he doubled down, saying that he would bomb Kigali without even setting boots on the ground. These are the exact words of the President of DRC against Rwanda, promising to cause regime change. This echoes a similar statement made on 17th November 2024 in Katanga, when he told military and provisional leadership that if he is given the opportunity to revise the constitution, he would use this new term to overthrow the government in Kigali. Those are clear and constant threats that Rwanda will never take lightly. To implement these threats, President Tshisekedi has mobilized a large coalition which includes the FDLR, genocidal militia, European mercenaries, Wazalendo militias, Burundian armed forces, and SAMI DRC. Council members, Consequently, Rwanda calls on all foreign forces deployed in the DRC to withdraw from this coalition only aimed at harming Rwanda. I wish to stress that the international community, including some members sitting in this council, have their fair share of the blame in what is happening today in the DRC, at least to condemn even threats of regime change from one member state to another. You also chose to turn a blind eye on these inflammatory statements and the build-up of the aforementioned military coalition, never once condemning the regime change agenda behind them. Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains committed to the Rwanda process, given important milestones that were achieved in the process that was led by President Lorenzo and Angola. And one of the milestones, the adoption of a concept of operations, the CONOPS, of the harmonized plan for the neutralization of the FDLR and lifting Rwanda's defensive forces, and a ceasefire that was agreed and was holding from August 2024. The remaining security issues between Rwanda and the DRC was the AFC M23 question. This question was therefore to be addressed. Unfortunately, in the ministerial meeting of 14th December, the DRC categorically refused any commitment of dialogue with the AFC M23. This then prevented a consensus on a draft peace agreement to be signed the following day by heads of state. Therefore, the only solution was to postpone the summit, as Rwanda is not interested in just a photo op. The heads of state were going to Angola for only one agenda item, to sign an agreement that should have been agreed. Mr. President, Rwanda deplored the intensification of hostilities between the Congolese coalition and the AFC/M23 since the breakdown of the summit. More worrying is the intensive shelling by FDLR, FARDC, from densely populated areas, including IDP camps, towards other populated areas held by AFC and M23. In order to bring about peace in Eastern DRC, Rwanda calls on the following. 1, the full implementation of mainly the neutralization of FDLR, which will lead to the lifting of Rwanda's defensive measures. 2, beyond the CONOPS, Rwanda calls on the withdrawal of foreign troops, part of the Congolese coalition, and we call for European mercenaries to be repatriated and be held accountable. 3, Rwanda believes that MONUSCO can be useful in restoring peace in Eastern DRC by stopping its support to a national army with a regime change mandate, as well as its support to a UN-sanctioned genocidal force and European mercenaries. Rwanda also reiterates its position that it has no hostile intentions against MONUSCO, despite its total failure over the past 26 years. 4, Rwanda believes in the strict adherence to the ceasefire of August 4th, 2024 by all parties, which would allow for a favorable environment for direct dialogue between the DRC and the M23. In this regard, I want to inform you that His Excellency President Kagame spoke with his counterparts from South Africa, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, yesterday. This positive conversation, held in a cordial atmosphere, was productive as it supported the already agreed ceasefire and the resumption of political talks, including with the AFC and M23. I also wish to inform you that tomorrow there will be a virtual ESC summit convened by His Excellency President Ruto on this very question. Before I close, I would like to mention that the DRC government has just claimed that there are Rwandan forces that died in DRC. I want to say that this is categorically not correct. If it was correct, DRC would have provided evidence. I don't think they have that evidence. If they have evidence of any Rwandan soldiers who have died on DRC soil, they should produce that evidence, which I'm sure, I know 100% sure, is not available because that's not true. In closing, Rwanda is committed to the pursuit of a political solution to the conflict. However, we believe that the Rwanda process must not be personalized or taken as an end in itself, but as a tool to resolve security concerns between Rwanda and the DRC. Both the Rwanda and Nairobi process urgently require new impetus in order to achieve sustainable peace and stability for all the countries in our region. We hope that the recent engagements will work towards that goal. I thank you, Council members.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. I now give the floor.
UN Security Council meeting on the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, M23, Paul Kagame, South Africa, Sadaka, and many others. Biki ebirina okukolebwa okulaba nga olutalo luli e Congo M23 gye bagamba nti Rwanda yegiwagira lulina kukoma. Kati no UN Security Council meeting eno etegeeza nti bawa report ez'enjawulo okuva mu ba representatives ab'enjawulo okuva ab'amawanga ag'enjawulo nti Rwanda okutemya n'okuzibula ng'eggye amagye gaayo e Congo. Okutemya n'okuzibula Rwanda ng'eggye ekomezza okuwagira M23. Okutemya n'okuzibula Rwanda ng'ezizza ebyokulwanyisa byeri mu kwolekeza eggwanga lya Congo. Okutemya n'okuzibula Rwanda ng'ezzeemu empisa. Era nti Rwanda bw'etakola bino ekinaddirira n'ekiraba. Kano ne Rwanda neevudde neyewozaako nti yo tebeeranga ku Congo maje gaayo Congo wabula ate Congo yejja n'erumba Rwanda. Era mbu balina ebitundu bya Rwanda bye baakuba ebyasesebbudde. Nti omukulembeze wa Congo yalagira nga yakalayira nti ye ekimuleese kujjako gavumenti ya Rwanda. Era nti ekisanja kino yakisaba nga kyakuba Rwanda kugisesebbula nti Rwanda bye tebitwala nga byamannyo wenu bya lusaago. Ne kati byonna bye boogera bikulaga nti oli bye byayogera kati bye bawagiza M23 kwaba nga bo bastandinzeeko kitegeeza nti bye bastandingako n'okuwagira M23 bekuba bokka omupiira beeyokya bokka. Ne katulinde biki ebinaaba biddirira tujja kuba we tuli okubibategeeza ebinaaba biva mu UN n'ebinaaba biva mu mawanga ag'enjawulo. Mulabye ne America nayo ewaddeyo byayo ng'eragira Rwanda nti 1 2 3 ng'ozizza abasirikale bo ne Rwanda ekyesigiriza onaawulira embaga.